Mara snapped the ledger open and pointed at a column of dates with her finger, then looked up the moment Thomas burst through the vault door carrying a scorched envelope. Her suspicion came out as a small, steady motion. She tapped the empty column twice with the brass, found magnifying glass, and then set the glass down as if to test whether the blank would catch dust like a real entry. The ledger was worn from years of hands, but its middle year was a clear, ruled gap where ink should have written births, deaths, marriages, rents paid, and taxes tallied. The absence itself felt deliberate and dangerous. Thomas laid the envelope on the table and said, "Mara, this fell from a cart of damaged parish papers. It smells of smoke and the edge is burnt." Mara had worked the municipal archives for 10 years. She moved among ledgers the way a watchmaker moves among gears. Small adjustments, quiet patience, and a habit of noticing a mismatched stitch or a penciled mark in a margin. She kept her satchel close, her spectacles on a chain, and a habit of tracing dates with a fingertip before she wrote her catalogue numbers. Tonight she was alone in the vault until Thomas's boots thudded the stair. By habit she had left a small lamp burning and a cup of cold tea at the ledger's elbow. The conflict was immediate and plain. A whole year erased from the public register, while a burned envelope insisted something had happened inside it. "Show me, Mara." Thomas eased the envelope open with gloved fingers. Widow Rosa stood in the doorway behind him, her shawl still wet with city drizzle and her hands folded around a small bundle of charcoal-stained paper. She did not sit. She kept her shoulders tight. When Mara lifted the charred flap, the first thing they smelled was smoke and wet rag glue. "These are names, Rosa." They were written down. "I know them." Mara spread the scorched paper flat. The ink survived in thin, stuttering lines. A date broke off at a half-formed number. A list of surnames ended with a torn edge. She felt a pressure behind her eyes and kept her voice level. "Read what you can. Mara Thomas." Thomas read aloud, "Careful, John Harker, 2114 March." Rosa cut him off with one short, steady sentence. He was taken that night. The vault smelled of paper dust and lamp oil. Mara's fingers left faint smudges on the charred margin. She had to do something that would change the ledger and risk official rebuke. Her suspicion hardened into a plan. Copy what remained, compare margins, and search for any unnatural erasure. She closed the ledger and tucked the scorched paper into her satchel. The action was small and legal seeming, preserving a damaged donation for cataloguing. The next morning she carried the fragments to the registrar's office and found Supervisor Calder behind a high desk stacked with neatly tied bundles. Calder read the description without lifting his eyes and said, "Our public registers are complete. We cannot accept unsupported claims. Catalogue the routine donations, Mara." Mara set the scorched parcel on the corner of his desk. "Supervisor Calder, this envelope contains names and dates. A full year is blank in this ledger." Calder's fingers tapped the desk. "Blank columns occur. Clerk's misfile. You will file the parcel and move on." His dismissal changed her anger into a tight, practical urgency. She felt the shift physically. The breath that had been slow tightened, and she pressed her palm flat on the envelope to steady herself. Calder added, "There is no reason to alarm the public. Routine, Mara. File it." She left his office with the envelope, but not with his consent. Outside the registrar's door she found Elias in the map room, hunched over rolled charts and a wooden box of ledger spines. "Elias," she said, "the margins on parish copies show erasure marks. Did you ever see penciled repeats that match an outside seam?" Elias pushed his spectacles up, rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "I noticed a small mark on a transfer from Northfield. I thought it was a clerk's sign." They moved back to the vault together. Mara and Elias worked at different tables. She with ledgers, he with a flattened parish map. Mara compared the public ledger margins with parish duplicates. In one parish copy she found faint erasure lines and a penciled notch repeated every few entries. She tapped the notch with a fingernail and said, "This matches a seam in the bound volume Elias mentioned." Elias looked away for a beat and then pointed to a ledger with a leather-worn spine that carried an extra layer of stitching. That one was stored off-site for conservation. He said, "I can show you the seam, but the storeroom is locked until morning." Mara's doubt turned into quiet determination. She and Thomas waited until the small hours when the vault's patrol light dimmed and the corridor's footsteps were farther away. They worked under the lamp with copying paper, a bone folder, and a small knife to ease the seam a fraction. Thomas held the lamp low and whispered, "If somebody ordered a year removed, they'll notice missing entries tomorrow." Mara did not answer at once. She kept her hand steady while she peeled the stitching and eased open the space between pages. Inside, folded tight and yellowed at the fold, was a narrow list of names with partial causes of absence noted in shortened and with a smear that could be blood or rust. They read the list together. Thomas swallowed and said, "These aren't clerical errors." Mara let her breath out. The urgency had become fear. Her jaw clenched and then loosened into a working memory of actions she needed to take. She copied every clear line, pressing the letter forms into her notebook. The lamp made the ink look fresh and human. Single letters hurried and looping, not the slow, clear hand of an official ledger. Someone had written their neighbors' names with the speed of panic. At dawn, Calder appeared in the corridor as if by chance. He had noticed the seam had been tampered with. "Mara," he said quietly, "there was movement in the stacks last night." "Explain." She kept her voice steady and factual. "I found a stitched seam with a folded list. It names people erased from the ledger's year." Calder's hands did not tremble, but he looked smaller when he met her eyes. "You should not pry at bound volumes without authorization," he said. "Catalog what you can." Mara felt the next emotion shift into sharp alarm. She stepped forward and spoke with a speed that altered her usual rhythm. "Calder, this isn't a simple misfile. There are names here. You must see the list." Calder reached into his coat and, after a brief pause, slid a pale memorandum across his palm into hers. She glanced at it. The memorandum was censored in places, lines blacked out, and orders stamped and signed by an office higher than his. Calder's mouth was a thin line when he said higher orders. Omit a year. The corridor seemed to hold its breath while Mara read the memorandum. The document gave a concrete reason, an instruction couched in national security language, and then a signature that pulled responsibility further from the registrar's desk. Her suspicion hardened into a cold, practical recognition. The erasure was sanctioned and therefore dangerous to reveal. Calder's voice was low. "I will not open this to the public. I will not bring this to the council. But I cannot have you exposing it." Mara folded the memorandum along its crease and felt the page's slight sweat. She met Calder's eyes and said, "Then I will protect what I must." He took a step back and let his shoulders slump in a way that admitted a concession. "Keep quiet, Mara," he said. "Catalog routine donations. If anyone asks, you found nothing." Mara's hands closed around the memoranda. Inside her, suspicion became accusation and then settled into a choice. She and Thomas returned to the vault to finish copying the names and to plan what to hide where the state had left a blank. Working in pairs, they copied lines into a small notebook Mara kept beneath her shawl. She marked page numbers and added a tiny penciled note by each name. A place, a broken date, a word like taken or burned. Thomas paused and then asked, "Mara, if they come looking for proof, what do we do?" She did not answer with theory. She steadied her hands, finished a line, tore the copy, and slid the strip into the ledger's seam. Her acceptance of risk showed on her face, a set jaw and a breath held for a half-second before she let it go. They resewed the ledger by hand with thread drawn from the repair kit. Each stitch felt heavy and purposeful. Mara smoothed the spine and closed the ledger as if completing a routine conservation task. When Calder came by the loading bay that morning, he saw neatly arranged boxes and asked no questions. Thomas loaded the last crate with the calm of someone who had rehearsed a lie. Widow Rosa returned briefly to the vault that day. She would not be driven from the registrar's door, and she brought a small package of rolled papers wrapped in cloth. Her voice when she spoke was quiet and direct. "They will not find their names in the public books, but someone must know them." Mara placed a folded scrap into Rosa's hand and said, "Take this to the river side plot and lay it beneath the marker for the Harkers. Tell no one." Rosa nodded and left with her shawl tucked tight around her shoulders. The vault settled into the brittle normality of work, while Mara finished a private index by a low table in the afternoon light that filtered through a high window. She listed names, dates, and where she had hidden each copied scrap. Her pen moved with a careful, cataloging rhythm that turned grief into a ledger of its own. Emotion shifted again, this time into a guarded hope that records hidden would outlast the official silence. Mara placed the small index into her satchel and felt the weight of the paper like a promise. She checked the satchel's strap, smoothed the satchel's worn leather, and slid it under her arm. Calder passed through the vault near closing and paused at the doorway. He looked at the tables, at the spotless stacks, and then at Mara's quiet private desk. He spoke with a thin exhale. You could be called to account for this. Mara folded her hands around her satchel and met his gaze directly. Then account me to the ledger of my conscience, not the state register, she said. He watched her for a long moment and then, with an almost reluctant tilt of his head, offered a small, practical piece of help. A delayed inspection the bearer would perform elsewhere that afternoon. The delayed inspection became their cover. Thomas rearranged delivery boxes while Calder accepted a request from the inspector for the morning. Rosa left with a small comfort. Mara had given her a copied line naming her husband among those removed, and she carried it like a folded secret to the cemetery. The alliance held in brittle pieces, a supervisor's concession, a clerk's willingness to lie, a widow's silent trust. Each act bound them tighter and increased the danger. Late that evening, Mara sat alone at her small private desk and rewrote the hidden names into a book that fit inside her satchel. She wrote slowly. Her hand trembled on the word Harker and steadied when she saw the full name completed on the page. Each line she wrote altered her life. When she sealed the book with a scrap of wax, she knew retrieving it later could mean arrest or worse. She placed the closed book into her satchel, slid it beneath a folded shawl, and closed the satchel with one deliberate motion. Her final action in the vault was concrete and small. She walked to the ledger table, touched the blank column with the pad of her thumb, and then turned away. At the threshold she paused, looked back at the rows of bound books, and then stepped into the corridor where Thomas waited with the delivery list in his hand. Thomas nodded without looking at her and said, "Everything is in order." Mara closed the satchel, and together they walked toward the stairwell where daylight would meet them, and where the registry's official pages would remain silent. The ledger sat shut on the table with its blank year unmarked to the public, but beneath its seam a private record lay folded and kept by a woman who had chosen small, risky action over sanctioned silence. In the vault's dim afternoon, Mara's decision replaced an uncertain night with a concrete, guarded morning. She had hidden names where an official blank had been prescribed. She had traded the risk of exposure for the assurance that someone would remember the people the state asked them to forget. That was enough for now. She would move with caution and keep the satchel close. She walked out into the corridor with Thomas and Calder's brief protection, the small book heavy at her side and the ledger's blank column locked behind her. The chapter ended with her stepping into sunlight and tightening the satchel's strap, a single physical motion that closed the scene on an active, resolute choice. The trunk hit wood, papers hissed. Mara's gloved hand stilled on the ledger edge as she said, "Thomas, open it." Suspicion sat in her throat like grit. She felt it as a precise, practical weight that made her fingers work faster. The scorched bundle spilled onto oak. Blackened envelopes, a calendar whose printed dates stopped where a year's column should continue. That immediate discovery named the danger, a whole year wiped from official pages, and set Mara moving before the vault door had yet clicked shut. Mara had opened that same ledger in the vault a day before. She had pointed at the column and felt the record's blankness like a missing sentence. The memory of Thomas bursting through the door with a scorched envelope came back as action, not thought. Thomas had said, "I found this on the cart outside," and he had shoved the bundle across the table. She used that concrete moment now to order the room. "Thomas, put the lamp here." Closed the shutters, her voice was low. Her hands refolded a charred corner to see a name. Suspicion drove her choices. It pushed her to check edges, to lift stamps that were half ash, to press the magnifying glass to suit streaked ink. She worked with tools, brass lens, thin bone folder, the satchel where she kept repair thread, not with feelings. Thomas stood too close and kept asking questions. "Mara, what is it? What year?" He spoke fast. He handed her a letter with a torn seal. "Thomas, Mara, don't touch the signatures." She folded a scorched flap back over itself. Her breathing sharpened. The suspicion that someone had removed a year and tried to burn its traces hardened into a plan. If the erasure had been deliberate, then there would be edges marked by handling, by patchwork repair, by instructions kept off the page. She looked for those things as if they were physical markings on skin. They sorted the contents on the long oak table under the lamplight. The lamps flamed through a small ring of warm color across soot. Thomas moved letters into piles. Municipal notices, a child's primer page, a folded list with half the ink gone. Mara read sentences aloud as she worked. Hargraves will say the books are whole. She said Hargraves will say nothing missing. That prediction steadied her. It also made her hurry. They carried the calendar to the municipal counter that evening. Clerk Hargraves stood behind a high wood rail, fingers tucked into the cuffs of a coat that had seen better days. These are municipal records, he said when Mara laid the calendar down. He tapped the blank column with an index finger. All accounted for. We keep every entry. What you have is damaged, Miss Mara, not altered. His voice had a blunt edge. His hands would not open to the paper. Mara lifted the magnifier and leaned close. Hargraves, she said, this ledger shows freshly sanded margins here. Someone smoothed the paper on this edge. Her speech had a clipped clarity. You signed the fiscal docket on the page before. Where did the signatures for the missing column go? She did not say missing year in abstract. She showed the ledger's edge and the indented stitching. Hargraves' jaw tightened. We keep our books. We do not remove columns. If there is damage, there is damage. He avoided saying the calendar's dates had been excised. His avoidance made Mara's suspicion move into a second shape. The suspicion became accusation. She saw it in the way his eyes flicked to the ledgers behind him and away again. An external event arrived in the form of a man at the counter. The inspector, a visitor from the magistrate's office, stepped forward and said, "What is the disturbance here?" His coat bore a brass pin. His presence shifted the room's temperature. Mara kept her voice level. "Inspector, this calendar is stripped. The dates stop mid-sequence. There are scorch marks on the letters that accompanied it." She set a blackened envelope on the rail. "I want an inventory taken." The inspector looked at the envelope, then at Clerk Hargreaves. The inspector's response did not clarify things. He reached instead for formality. "Miss Mara, official procedure will take the documents to the central office for examination." His hand hovered over the bundle. Hargraves, "Yes, I will fetch the transfer manifest." The two men exchanged a small, sealed look. Mara felt a pinch of anger, an emotion shift from suspicion to annoyance, translate into a practical decision. She could not let the material be carried off, not if the missing column was deliberate. Back at her desk in the reading room, Mara sorted scorched letters by seal and hand. Thomas leaned against the bookshelf and read aloud what he could make from charred script, interment authorized by order of the magistrate. He said, "Here, bury as unrecorded." The words hit with blunt weight. Mrs. Edda's name appeared on a margin note, smeared as if someone had rubbed ash into ink to hide it. Mara, Thomas, Mrs. Edda. She lives off Thorn Alley. She buried people last winter. She might know more. Mara did not hesitate. She folded a fragile paper into her satchel and met Thomas at the doorway. They found Mrs. Edda in the back room at the alley's end, where soot stained the walls and a kettle sat on a coals basin. The widow's hands moved with practiced slowness. She had a scrap of cloth wrapped around a small bundle of bones. When Mara showed the scorched letter, Edda's shoulders buckled. "Do you know why they asked me?" she said. "To bury them without ledger marks." Her voice was flat. She placed a palm over the little bundle and looked at Mara. Mara listened and measured. She did not say the word guilt or shame. She watched Edda's fingers and breath. "Edda, they brought men who would not be named. They brought carts at dawn. They paid me in coin and told me not to write it down. They not here, not in the roll." Her hands shook. The widow's account changed the inquiry from speculation to human harm. Mara felt the emotion shift again. Suspicion moved into a stinging urgency. She jotted the times Edda gave, 2 cart runs in October, 6 corpses each time, into a clean sheet she kept for notes. On the walk back, Thomas kept asking, "Who pays a widow to hide burials? Who orders that?" Mara answered with an action. She tightened the strap on her satchel and adjusted the lamp in the reading room so its light focused on the ledger seam. "We follow paper and payment," she said. "If someone ordered burials off the books, they left signatures or names somewhere." Thomas tapped his own fingers on the satchel and then stopped. He produced a folded scrap and handed it to Mara. "I didn't want to open it before," he said. "It was tucked in my satchel when I left the cart." The slip was stiff, suit along its crease. They examined the slip under the brass lens. Letters had crumbled away at the fold, but a few names remained. Officials and their signatures, 3 of them barely legible. Mara read aloud the surviving letters, her speech even and quiet. "Hargreaves," she said. "Magistrate's clerk appears here as signatory." The sight of Hargreaves' name on a roster that implicated officials made Mara feel cold in a focused way, not poetic cold, but the practical recognition that the erasure had coordination. They returned to confront Hargreaves with the disintegrating roster. The ledger room smelled of paper dust and lamp oil. The vault doors were closed. The morning light slanted through high windows. Mara laid the scorched letters and the thin list on the desk, then looked up at Hargreaves and the inspector as they entered. "Hargreaves," she said, "this slip was found in Thomas's satchel. It bears your name. Explain." Her voice left no room for the clerk's evasions. Hargreaves took 2 steps forward and reached for the papers. "You cannot present damaged items as proof," he said. "You cannot." He stopped when the inspector moved with a brusque hand toward the documents. The inspector opened his mouth, and the exchange became fast. "Inspector, you cannot confiscate without a warrant." Mara. Her hands were steady, but her pulse ran quick. She counted the small signs, a crease at the inspector's temple, Hargreaves' fingers curling. The inspector's jaw tightened. "Miss Mara, step back. These documents will be secured." Hargreaves tried to take the letters, then moved to physically block Mara's reach toward the ledger. He thrust an arm between Mara and the desk. "Hargreaves, don't touch those names." "Mara, Thomas, distract them." Thomas answered with motion. He stepped away, knocked over a small pile of blank forms, and said, "Oh, by the ledger, there's ink on the underpage." He lifted a sheet and hummed as if tracing ink. The 3 men turned to the papers he held. The move brought Mara 2 heartbeats. Mara reached into her sleeve, and then into the ledger's binding beneath the desk. She palmed 2 scorched letters and a slim roll of names. Her hands moved like an artisan's, sliding the papers into the seam where the stitching bound the ledger's pages. She did this with practiced, precise motions. Tuck, press, smooth. The action was small and exact. The clerk's arm knocked into the desk, searching, missing the seam where Mara had worked. "Hargreaves!" The inspector barked. "Step away." Hargreaves obeyed with a forced smile. The inspector moved to collect the outward documents. Thomas returned to Mara's side with a cough that sounded too loud in the quiet room. Mara felt her chest tighten, a concrete sensation, a tightened throat and a tremor in her right hand. But she held the seam closed with her palm until the inspector's attention fell elsewhere. A sharp external event arrived. Hargreaves grabbed for the ledger, and at the same moment a visiting junior clerk tripped in with a transfer manifest stamped by the magistrate. The inspector reached for the manifest, and his eyes flicked to the ledger's face. "We need to take these items," he said. Hargreaves pushed a hand over the scorched bundle. The clerk's motion became brusque, and then physical. He leaned to seize a letter. Mara slid the last bit of the roster fully into the seam and tucked the worn thread back into place. The tension peaked and then ruptured in a real scuffle. Hargreaves lunged to block Mara's hand from the ledger. Mara stepped around his shoulder and pulled the ledger toward her. Voices rose quickly in short lines. "Hargreaves, let go." "Mara, this is official property, Inspector. You cannot." "Miss Mara, step back now." Hargreaves swore and shoved. Thomas grabbed Hargreaves' sleeve. The 2 men jostled. The ledger fell, pages fanning like a quick gust, showing the smooth gap where the year's column should be. The inspector moved to take the torn letters. Mara moved faster. She put a palm flat over the binding and pushed a thin roll deeper until it lay flush. The room smelled of hot metal and lamp oil, of dust disturbed. Mara felt the motion of the scuffle in her bones, the precise contour of pressure on her palm. She did not narrate her feelings inwardly. She counted actions. Shove, block, press, tuck. The roster was hidden by the seam again. Thomas caught the inspector's sleeve with both hands and said, "Inspector, you must see the suit under the seal." The inspector let go to peer. Mara slid the ledger shut and picked up a clean primer. In the immediate quiet after the clash, Hargreaves backed away and the inspector collected a small pile of documents. "We will take these for review." Mara watched him fold the manifest. His voice was efficient, not cruel. She did not attempt to stop the official process. She had already made her decision. She had preserved a covert copy where no one would think to look. Mara's choice moved the chapter into a different rhythm. She had shifted from suspicion to urgency to a resolute concealment. She also shifted from private investigator into active resistor. That movement appeared in small, specific acts, using Thomas as a diversion, tucking the roster into the seam, closing the ledger with a practiced hand. Each action showed her decision rather than her telling it. After the inspector left with the documents he claimed, Mara sat at the vault desk and fanned the scorched letters again. Thomas paced once and then returned. "Mrs. Edda gave us times," he said. "I can find the cartman who drove them." "He hauls for the market stalls." Mara nodded. "Find him," she said. "Bring me the cart ticket stubs. Bring anything with a stamp." Thomas left with the lamp, his shoulders pushed forward. Mara folded a single clean scrap and prepared a small copy of a name list from the seam where she had pressed the roster's edge. She did not write down the whole roster. She copied only a few initials and 2 names so she could cross-check them with stamps and signatures later. This was not an abstraction of courage. It was a simple, measurable act. Duplicate, hide, and seed. She left the vault at dawn with the ledger closed and the lamp low. The city had its usual sounds, a cartwheel here, a child's primer opening at a doorstep there. Mara stopped at the church steps and slipped a folded scrap into a child's primer left on the step. She pressed the paper flat between 2 pages and left without looking back. The action was small, precise, and deliberate. It ensured that one private truth would survive outside the municipal chain of custody. Before she turned away, a loose footstep sounded on the stone. Someone passed above on the church stair. Mara felt a brief, quick tightening in her shoulders, then released it. The ledger's seam held the roster. The scorched letters rested in a place where ordinary hands might later find them by accident. That quiet preservation was not a victory. It was a small refusal to let the year vanish entirely. Outside, Thomas ran up panting. "Mara, the cartman remembers Edda's name. He gave me a ticket with the magistrate's stamp." He held the stub between 2 fingers so the ink would not smudge. Mara took it and matched the stamp to the signatures she'd glimpsed in the seam. The match did not absolve anyone, and it did not bring immediate redress. It did, however, alter the facts in a concrete way. The blank column showed coordination. The cartman had a stamped ticket. Names connected the magistrate's office to the unrecorded burials. They counted details aloud in short sentences, practical as a ledger. 2 runs in October, Thomas, 6 bodies each, magistrate stamp on the ticket, Mara. Hargrave's name on the slip. Each statement functioned like an entry in a ledger of actions. Each added weight to the case they were building. When they parted at the vault, Mara kept the lamp in her satchel and the copy folded inside her sleeve. At the close of the chapter, Mara returned the ledger to its shelf with hands that moved carefully. She felt the residual sting of the morning's conflict in her palm, a physical ache where she had pressed the seam. She thought of Mrs. E. Edda's hands on a bundle of bones and of the cartman's stub damp with ink. The chapter's small conflicts had resolved into a choice. Hide evidence where officials would not expect it and seed a truth outside formal channels. The final event of the chapter was not dramatic in speech, but concrete in action. Mara shut the vault door, slid the clean primer with the folded scrap onto a pew during the morning service, and stepped away. A bell struck faintly in the distance. She left the ledger closed on the shelf, the seam holding a list of names no official ledger would show that day. That closing action completed the chapter's immediate conflict. She had protected a record by hiding it physically, not by confronting rhetoric. The blank column remained in the municipal books, but one thin roll of names lay where a child's hand might find it. Mara walked down the stone steps into the street with lamp oil on her gloves and ash at her thumb. She kept moving, practical and precise, carrying a suspicion turned into preservation. The chapter ended with the vault door clicking shut behind her and the ledger's cover held gently under her arm. Emotion root, suspicion, emotion shifts. Suspicion, urgency, resolute action. The concrete decisions and small physical acts in this chapter resolved the immediate struggle. The municipal clerk was challenged, the inspector took documents, and Mara protected evidence by hiding copies in seams and in a child's primer. The last sentence stands on a concrete beat. Mara closed the vault door, the ledger under her arm, and a distant bell marked the hour as she walked away. Mara pushed through the low door at the municipal counter and saw Hargreave lift a thin blade against the spine of a bound ledger. Suspicion tightened Mara's hands. The bailiff at the desk stepped forward and shoved the book away from her palm. "Hands off, woman," the bailiff barked. Mara planted her feet on the scuffed floor and said, "Thomas, don't stand back." The clerk froze mid-scrape as Thomas moved to the counter, holding the scorched envelope he had carried through the vault earlier. Mara's suspicion was not a mood. It was a list of precise reasons she came here. The ledger's gilt dates stopped where the missing year should be. The scorched calendar from the trunk named months and a roster that did not match the ledger's empty gap. Mara tapped the counter with one finger, then opened her mouth to force the ledger back toward the clerk. "Town Clerk Hargreave," she said, voice steady. "Why are you scraping ink from a year that once existed?" Hargreave's mouth set thin. He did not answer at once. Within 3 sentences the threat was clear. This was not a mistake. Mara had stood alone in vaults before, turning browned pages until her eyes tired, but she had never seen an official actively erase. She stepped closer and the bailiff moved so quickly Mara felt the leather of his glove under her elbow. "You will leave this room," the bailiff said to Mara. "You will leave now." Thomas slid the scorched envelope across the counter. The envelope's seal had a small burn hole in one corner. Hargreave inhaled and then, with too much calm in his voice, said, "We have no ledger for that year. Mara, you have ink on your hand." "Hargreave." "It matches this page." Hargreave's jaw twisted. Mara's background mattered in this moment. She had spent years cataloging slips and signatures, the slow work that taught her to notice ink density, the pressure of a pen, the way a scribe folded a margin. She had seen ledger pages rebound, reissued, relabeled. She knew what a genuine omission felt like on a page. She breathed out slowly and thought of the trunk that had hissed and spilled hot papers on oak in the archive room. She thought of the burnt calendar that listed harvest dates interrupted with black smears. She looked at Hargreave and saw a clerk who had spent too many years thinking rules were enough. Hargreave laughed once, a dry sound. "You are making a fuss, Archivist Mara. We maintain order here. If pages are lost, they are lost." Claiming a missing year, he leaned forward. The bailiff's hand hovered near a ledger strap. A clerk at the back of the office stepped toward a locked chest. Mara felt outrage rise in the shape of quick, exact motions. Her fingers tightened around the envelope and she stepped back as if a cord pulled her. Jonas, who had helped her sort burned edges in her study the night before, appeared in the doorway behind her. Jonas carried a small satchel and looked at the ledger without speaking. "Jonas, Mara." Jonas nodded once and set the satchel on the counter. He did not look at Hargreave. He laid one palm over the satchel's strap and said, "We can do this quietly, Hargreave. There is no need for this to be public." Hargreave's face went blank. Mara heard the clerk at the rear clear her throat. Hargreave's denial hardened. "You have no right to parade these papers here. Leave them at the archive." "I will review them at my leisure." The bailiff moved to intercept Mara. She put one hand on the counter and said, "You will not lock this room, Hargreave." "Not today." Hargreave's reply was a question. "Or what, Mara?" Mara answered with a name and a fact. "Eliza waited outside your door all morning." Hargreave's eyes flicked toward the stairwell. A narrow stairwell swallowed half the morning light. Mara, Thomas, and Jonas were led there under the bailiff's escort. Inside the stairwell the air smelled of damp stone and candle wax. The bailiff held the door. Mara pressed the scorched calendar into the clerk's feet and let the torn ledger margin fall onto the step. "Look at this," she said. "This space is deliberate." Hargreave picked up the torn margin and stared at a ragged line where printed dates ended. He spat. "That rag is corrupted. It fell from the archive's trunk months ago." Thomas put both hands on the wall and said, "It came from a trunk we found in the vault this morning." "The trunk had a burned seal. Do you deny it, Hargreave?" Hargreave's throat worked. Footsteps approached on the stairwell landing. Mara tightened her grip on the calendar and the second emotional change moved through her. Suspicion turned to urgency. She had expected Hargreave to lie. She had not expected a witness to arrive who would change the rhythm of the room. "Archivist Mara," a voice said, small and raw. Eliza set down a bundle at Mara's feet. The bundle smelled faintly of soot and of cloth that had been pressed while wet. Eliza lifted her chin. "This is mine," she said. "Those pages listed names. I can read where my husband's name should be. I remember the roster. There was a year when men never came back from the fields, and I put down names for them." Her hands shook as she opened one envelope and showed a single name written on browned paper. Hargreaves' expression changed in a single tick. He tried to force his practiced official calm back into place. "Madam, you must speak with the clerk on proper notice." "You cannot," Eliza interrupted. "Hargreave, you erased them. You took a page that listed the town and you made it blank. I remember seeing the list on a board in the market in the spring. My neighbor told me." Jonas stepped forward and said, "Jonas." He set the satchel down and opened a small cloth-wrapped ledger he had taken from a junior registrar. He did not speak until Hargreave looked at the pages uneasily. "This is a daily register," Jonas quietly. "It records births and deaths in the name of a junior registrar. It was kept in a pocketbook." He hid it. Hargreave snapped, "You had no right." And then another voice cut across. The bailiff moved his weight from one foot to the other. He glanced at Hargreave and then at Mara. The stairwell held 3 different reactions. Hargreave's practiced denial, Eliza's plea, and Mara's steady insistence. Mara realized the second emotion shift in herself. The urgency bent toward anger that had to be translated into a choice. She could fight for public airing, or she could try to preserve proofs quietly. She looked at Jonas. Jonas met her eyes and gave a simple nod that meant, "Force the issue." That night Mara studied the Scorch bundle in her private study with Jonas by the lamp. Jonas set a small magnifying glass on the table and lifted a page with a careful hand. "The handwriting here is different, Jonas. This note in the margin is not their usual hand. It uses a nickname for the registrar." Mara's hands smelled of lamp oil and paper dust. She breathed and repeated the name aloud. The name matched a man dismissed 5 years earlier for excessive candor, a registrar who had argued that every death must be recorded. The marginal note used a folding and ink pressure that matched letters she had handled in the same man's account book. Mara felt something like relief, clarity replacing doubt, but then she found herself holding grief. Grief arrived in the shape of a single line. A village roster scribbled with place names and a single column torn away. Mara and Jonas read aloud lines from the scorched calendar. They spoke short sentences so the words would not tangle. March 9th, Jonas read "Market burned." Mara, April 2nd, Jonas 40 names. They paused between lines. Each pause was work. Between these pauses another external event shifted the scene. A knock at Mara's study door. It rattled softly. Mara closed the ledger and tightened the strap around it. "Come in," she said. Thomas entered and set down a pocket ledger he had lifted from under a deputy registrar's coat earlier that night. He had mud on his boots and a small smear of ink on his thumb. This belonged to the junior registrar, Thomas. He kept it in his pocket. "I took it when he tried to come for us. He was going to hand it over." It wasn't for Hargreave. Thomas's breath steamed faint in the lamp glow. Mara opened the pocket ledger and saw daily notations in cramped hand. The ledger listed births, deaths, and simple notes. Mrs. Carter fever, 3 boys, barn collapse, no bodies found at Lane. The entries ran through every week of the blank year. Some lines had extra marks, crosses, smolks. Mara's mouth went dry. She read the ledger aloud and let the words land in the room. "Jonas, that ledger contradicts the official books." "Mara," Hargreave removed these entries. He could not show this publicly. He had meant to finish the erasing. Thomas's voice dropped. He had help. "Thomas." Mara could feel the pressure in the story climb. The next decision belonged to someone other than her. She and Jonas went to Hargreave's private office at a quiet hour, the hour when curtains sag and clerks think doors are safe. Hargreave sat behind his desk. He looked smaller than Mara remembered. Jonas did not show a face of accusation. He set the pocket ledger on the desk and pushed it toward Hargreave as a lever. Jonas's hands were steady. "We did not steal this to shame you, Hargreave, Jonas. We brought it because someone must answer." Hargreave's mouth worked. "Who are you to make demands?" he said. Jonas, he laid a single page flat. "This registrar had a conscience. He wrote names. Did you order his dismissal?" Hargreave's eyes flicked. For a long moment Hargreave looked like a man choosing between 2 routes. Jonas spoke again, this time listing facts without flourish. "The ledger lists 40 known deaths. The ledger's entries run through March to May. Your official register shows nothing. You cannot say this is negligence and expect it to vanish. Hargreaves' voice dropped to a whisper. You do not understand the burdens of office, he said. Jonas looked at Mara. Mara looked at Hargreave and said, Hargreave, say it plainly. Did you remove a year? Hargreaves' jaw tightened. The room held a third emotional shift in Mara. The urgency settled into a hard resolve. Mara pushed forward the scorched calendar and the pocket ledger together. People died, she said. They were not recorded because someone chose that. Why? Hargreave did not answer directly. He shifted his weight as if to stand. At dawn, Mara brought the scorched calendar, the junior registrar's pocket ledger, and Eliza to the archive's public reading table. The large table had room for everyone to see. Clerks gathered, the town's minor officials drifted in. Hargreave arrived last, his face a mask. Mara laid the papers down in a neat row. The public reading table was a place of ritual. Placing evidence there made the matter official by procedure. Mara spoke in short sentences that left no room for cotton. This ledger belongs to the town, she said. It lists births and deaths for every day of the missing year. The calendar names the markets and the days men did not return. Eliza can testify to the names she recorded. Eliza nodded and said, My Thomas's name was on one list. He did not come home. People leaned in to look. The room shifted in attention. Hargreave tried to take the papers. Jonas stepped between him and the table. Do not touch those records, Jonas. Hargreave snapped, You will not parade private notes as proof in a public office. Jonas answered with a line of quick facts. This is a town record. It was kept by a registered clerk. It was hidden. Tell us where the official pages for that year went. The room filled with voices. The bailiff tried to restore order. 3 or 4 clerks moved for the papers. Thomas hissed, Jonas, watch the right side. A clerk reached for the pocket ledger and Jonas moved his hand onto the page. The clerk answered, We will seal these in the clerk's chest until the council meets. Mara felt her pulse sharpen into action. A public meeting. Now Hargreaves' face changed. He looked toward the outer door. A rapid exchange followed. Hargreave, you cannot force a council this morning, Jonas. We will call witnesses now. Hargreave, you will be removed if you persist. Thomas. He stepped forward and pushed a single envelope across the table. This envelope is sealed with the registrar's mark. It lists a village roster. Hargreave reached. Thomas blocked him with an edge of elbow. The rapid back and forth spun through 6 lines. Hargreave, you are reckless. Jonas, you are hiding facts. Thomas, I will not let them go. Clerk, seal them. Eliza, I will speak. The exchange was short, sharp, and public. The council did not resolve the issue that morning. Officials tried to seize the scorched calendar and the pocket ledger. Clerks moved with practiced efficiency. Jonas slipped a vital ledger fragment into his coat, while Thomas distracted a clerk by asking for a copy of an unrelated permit. The scramble turned the official attempt at suppression into a crude exposing of motives. Hargreave hissed, Stop this chaos. A small clerk, whose name Mara did not know, whispered to Hargreave, Sir, some of us kept copies. We could be in trouble. Hargreave's shoulders hunched. His voice lost its public authority. In the middle of the chaos, someone shouted the registrar's dismissed name. A small moment of confusion froze hands. Mara used the pause to speak to the assembled townspeople. Listen, she said. If this year is blank in the books, those blanks do not stop the living who remember. We have ledger pages that contradict the public books. We have witnesses. Eliza held up a scorched envelope and read a single line aloud. The room quieted. The mayor's clerk cleared his throat. Hargreaves' face paled. He realized the stakes changed when ordinary people listened to names read at the table. The twist came not from a new document but from a junior clerk's action. A clerk named Jonas, no, not Jonas the archivist, a different clerk whom Hargreave had patronized, stepped forward and said, I kept a copy. I copied pages for my own records in case of loss. The corridor hushed. Hargreaves' mouth opened, then closed. Mara's eyes found Jonas the archivist, and then the other Jonas the clerk. The confusion mattered and then clarified. Not everyone in the office agreed. That revelation changed how people judged Hargreaves' choices. Hargreave had relied on the office's silence, not expecting companions to break ranks. After the scuffle and the blurred shouting, Mara walked back to her private vault with the salvaged fragment in a thin cloth. Her hands moved with deliberate care. The chapter's final emotional movement settled into a quiet reckoning. She felt grief that began as a tightness in her chest and returned to steady action. She placed the fragment into the seam of a ledger on her worn desk and pushed the seam closed with the heel of her hand. The ledger's cover took the fragment as if a pocket received a letter. She closed the desk drawer and pressed her palm flat on the wood until she could feel the grain beneath her hand. Mara did not pronounce victory. The public books might remain blank tomorrow. Council rules could be invoked to seal the matter. Officials could still reassert authority and call the evidence tainted. But in the seam of her ledger a name stayed. In the seam a date stayed. In the seam a small record survived that could be shown to a widow or a child who asked. Mara felt a practical relief, not a sentimental one. She had saved one concrete thing. She walked to the window of her private vault and watched dawn push against the wall of the archive. The light fell on a ledger strap. She picked up her brass-bound magnifying glass and set it on the desk. Jonas stood in the doorway. Jonas, he did not give counsel. He simply said, "We did what we could." Mara answered with an action. She tightened the strap around the ledger and slid it into the shelf where only she could reach it. The ledger fit into its place like a single book pressed among many. She put on her threadbare gloves and slid them into her satchel. She thought of Eliza and of the men whose names now rested in a secret pocket inside an official ledger. Before Mara left the vault, she wrote a single line on a fresh scrap and folded it into an envelope. She addressed it in a small hand. To be given only to kin upon request. She did not say who would hold authority to open that envelope. She slipped it into the seam beside the fragment and closed the desk. The act was quiet. It was a pledge made in ink and paper and a precise, deliberate hand. The public might never reconcile the missing year in the official register. The private ledger in Mara's vault would hold one answer. Mara walked out of the archive into a town that would wake to argue, to deny, and to test its laws. She felt exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. She felt something else too, a small, stubborn clarity in how she would proceed. She would catalogue, protect, and when necessary expose. She would not let the ledger be the only place where memory hid. She would teach Thomas and Jonas to copy pages and to watch hands for ink smudges. She would meet Eliza's eyes and, with no speech beyond a folded paper, confirm that names were kept somewhere. The final paragraph of the chapter closes on a concrete action. Mara slid the salvaged fragment into the seam of a ledger, ran her thumb over the worn leather, and then latched the desk drawer with a single, firm click. She turned and walked down the archive's corridor. The door to the vault closed behind her with a deliberate thud.